If they'd got away with it, it would have been the world's biggest ever robbery. Police today foiled an audacious attempt to steal £350 million worth of diamonds on display in the Millennium Dome. Tonight, 12 people are in custody. A police undercover operation had been going on for months when the gang finally struck. At 9:40 this morning, a JCB digger smashed its way into the dome. Under the cover of smoke bombs, 4 men ran to the De Beers diamond stand and started hammering at display cases. Then armed police, dressed as cleaners, sprang their trap. All 4 were arrested. Outside on the Thames, another man waiting in a powerboat was captured. And on the north side of the river, a man believed to have been monitoring police radio was also arrested. Our correspondent Stephen Cape reports from the Dome.
It was one of the most daring robbery attempts ever. The criminals had planned out every last detail, but the police were always one step ahead. Shortly after 9 this morning, the gang, using a JCB digger, smashed down this metal door of the Dome and parked the vehicle just meters from where the Millennium jewels were housed. This was the prize, worth in excess of £350 million. Little did they know, the real gems had been moved to safety and replaced with fakes. Inside the Dome, police officers dressed as cleaners with weapons hidden in bin liners pounced as the gang set off smoke bombs and entered the vault with hammers to get at the jewels. This man didn't want to be named because he works here, but he was a witness.
There were 2 armed police came running by saying, "Out of the way, armed police." About 5-10 seconds after that, there was a sound of 5 or 6 cracks. Sounded like single shot gunfire.
I heard automatic gunfire and I heard an awful lot of shouting. We were working in the theatre at the time and we realised something pretty serious had happened when a lot of people were herded into the theatre, obviously for their own safety.
The gang would have used a powerboat moored here to make a James Bond-style getaway. The police said no shots were fired and they arrested suspects on both sides of the river, at the Dome and in Kent. The detective heading the investigation said it had taken months of planning to set up a successful ambush.
If this robbery was carried out in accordance with the wishes of those taking part, it would have been the biggest robbery to occur anywhere in the world. This was a very audacious attempt at a robbery, but it was foiled by an even more audacious police response.
100 police officers were involved in the operation to foil the plot. At the time of the attempted robbery, paying guests were already arriving at the Dome.
I was very satisfied, having gone over the plans in detail, that the safety of people who are here and who visit us would not be at risk.
These Dorset children were performing unaffected this afternoon, just 20 metres from the scene of the crime. This morning, they were kept in a safe place when armed police moved in. And for staff at De Beers, there was a sigh of relief tonight. They were part of the police operation to catch the robbers.
So as far as we know, this is the first time that something of this nature has been attempted on a collection that is quite as rare and as priceless as this collection.
Amid high security, the diamond copies were removed from the Millennium Dome this evening. It's in everybody's interest even these don't fall into the hands of criminals. Detectives knew this robbery would take place. It was a matter of waiting for the right moment to make an arrest, and it seems to have paid off. Stephen Cape, BBC News at the Millennium Dome.
As you just heard, the capture of the armed gang is the culmination of a police undercover operation stretching back months. More now from our correspondent, Richard Bilton.
For more than a month, thousands of people have toured the Dome, not knowing they were part of a huge police surveillance operation. Both De Beers, who own the diamonds, and the Dome, who were displaying them, were given weeks of notice. A gang is working on a plan, they were told, to steal the Millennium Diamond.
De Beers was always in the loop, and I think the primary for the police and for David and I has been the safety of the public and safety of our people. And that was the ultimate condition, that we were absolutely sure that we were taking any step possible to avoid anybody to being hurt, that we collaborate with the police.
The last James Bond film featured an escape sequence along the River Thames with the Dome in the background. Security experts say today's raid was straight from a film script. They say a more experienced professional gang of thieves is more likely to pay someone to open a door than smash it down with a JCB. But what was clear was there had been some serious planning. What is almost certain is the gang will have been here before to check out the location here at the Dome, places like the Money Zone behind me. What's very likely is the police will have been right behind them. The key to this operation was surveillance. By this morning, the police will have been tipped off, ready, disguised and in place with their guns hidden, so that when that JCB came crashing through the doors this morning, it was driving straight into a trap. To get to that point, the police had been working for weeks. It's likely they used wiretaps and close observation. A former flying squad officer who knows the system says in the end it's about trusting informants and staying patient.
You have your surveillance team in place all the time, but you have your arrest team in place in conjunction with the armed officers from SO19. You have them in place when you believe the robbery is going to go down. There's a lot of waiting around and a lot of opportunities that never actually materialise.
Tonight, the examination of the scene continues, a dramatic location at the end of an extraordinary operation. Richard Bilton, BBC News at the Dome.
And our correspondent Stephen Cape is at the Dome. Stephen, this is a massive coup for the police, but there must have been a real fear that members of the public might have been hurt.
The thing is, you have to make sure that members of the public are safe, but you also have to make sure that the robbers do not suspect anything. You see, when they turned up here in the JCB, they would have been looking around, making sure that everything looked absolutely normal. Imagine if there were no paying guests going in. So clearly the police would have worked very hard to make sure that there was nobody in any possible firing line if anything had gone wrong. It was a risk, yes, but it seems to have paid off.
And the police have mentioned that they knew of 2 other raids being planned on the Dome earlier this year. Are they confident now they've got all the people responsible?
It's very difficult to tell at this stage. Remember, this morning they were talking about 9 people who had been arrested, then it moved up to 12. Inquiries continue, and clearly in the next few hours we'll know whether or not more arrests need to be made.
Stephen Cape at the Dome, thanks very much. The controversial operation to separate the Siamese twins, Jodie and Mary, has been completed by surgeons in Manchester. The weaker twin Mary has died, as predicted, but Jodie, the stronger, has survived. The operation, which lasted 20 hours, finally ended at 5 o'clock this morning.
Inside St Mary's tonight, Jodie is battling for life. Outside, a silent vigil from Roman Catholics opposed to the surgery which killed her sister Mary. Earlier today, the hospital, which is under intense media scrutiny, revealed the surgery had gone on until 5 a.m, 20 hours in all.
Jodie is currently in a critical but stable condition. Unfortunately, despite all the efforts of the medical team, Mary sadly died. As with all major surgery, the first few days following an operation are the most critical, and our thoughts remain with Jodie and her parents.
Experts agree Jodie's life hangs in the balance.
The care of the babies will continue for the next, well, certainly the next couple of days, but maybe into the next couple of weeks before they know they're out of the woods.
Jodie's parents are by her side in intensive care, where she's making steady progress. The little girl faces many hurdles in the days and weeks ahead, including the prospect of further surgery, which doctors say should enable her to lead a relatively normal life. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, at St Mary's Hospital in Manchester.
In a few hours' time, Americans will begin to have an idea about the next tenant of the White House. Over 100 million people across the United States are expected to cast their vote for the president. And for the latest, let's join Hugh in Washington. Hugh.
Fiona, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's lunchtime here in Washington. The polls opened at 7 this morning. They'll close at 8 tonight. Those hours vary a little across the country. And all the signals are that we're still looking at one of the closest races for the White House in a century. The turnout will be absolutely crucial, given the narrow margins that we're talking about today. Vice President Al Gore is now back home in Tennessee. He's waiting for those results. The BBC's John Simpson is there too.
Al Gore hit the ground still running in Tennessee, knowing that within hours he'll either be the world's most influential man or just a has-been. And a few miles away in Nashville, the people who'll help to decide that were queuing to vote. But if you believe the opinion polls, Gore may have trouble winning Tennessee, though the real battleground will be states like Florida, Pennsylvania and Michigan.
So here it is, the voting machine.
fact, there are all sorts of different ones in the state of Tennessee alone, let alone across the United States. But in this case, this is how you do it for president and vice president. You press that button for Al Gore, you press that button for George W. Bush, the others are for independents and local candidates and so on. And then at the end, you press that button, vote, and the whole thing goes through. May we ask you, madam, how did you vote?
I voted for Mr. Al Gore and Joe Lieberman.
You like George W. Bush the best?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Why? Because he's for the future instead of the same old things in Washington.
And then, behind the voting booth curtains, Al Gore and his wife, Tipper, pressed the electronic buttons, which they did in record time. And the latest of any number of campaign kisses. It's been their trademark, win or lose. And we'll soon know which. John Simpson, BBC News, Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, over in Texas, George W. Bush and the Republicans are making some rather confident noises. Like Al Gore, Bush maintained an exhausting campaign schedule right to the last minute, literally. And like Gore, he'll be waiting for the early results and the signals from two of the biggest states. They are Florida and Pennsylvania. They could well decide which man makes it to the White House here. Philippa Thomas is in Texas as Mr. Bush makes those last-minute appeals to bring out the vote.
Greg, George W. Bush, seeking the presidency.
Dialing for votes this morning, the Republican says he's not taking anything for granted. He may be shaken by his narrowing lead in the polls, but he was determined not to show it when he set his own example, voting bright and early. A record turnout is expected in Texas today, and in this state, Bush is the popular choice.
I think he's a man for the job. He's a man of integrity and honesty, and I think we need some new leadership in Washington. I think he's a businessman, and he's not a hired politician.
I really trust the man. I do not trust Gore. He's a politician.
But we heard some critical comment too, this from the governor's own congressman.
Before this campaign, his principal foreign policy experience was with Oklahoma and Mexico. And so I think he's learned and grown a lot in this campaign, and if he's elected president, he has some good advisors. And I just feel that Vice President Gore is more equipped.
So will the nation choose the man with Washington experience or the Texan who offers a fresh start? Mr. Bush will be spending most of the day here at the governor's mansion, where he'll be enjoying a traditional election day dinner with his family. He's confident, perhaps too confident, that by this time tomorrow he will be president-elect. Philippa Thomas, BBC News in Austin, Texas.
Well, that's the view then from the two main camps, and there's certainly plenty for us to talk about. We'll be back later in the programme with the very latest signals from the polling stations. For now, it's back to you, Fiona.
Thanks, Hugh. With record levels of rain falling, flooding is spreading to new areas and leading to further evacuations. In Yorkshire, 100,000 sandbags have been brought in to bolster barricades. The flood defences in York and Selby are expected to hold tonight, but the Environment Agency has described the situation in Barlby as critical. 1,000 homes have been evacuated as the River Ouse has broken its banks.
It is simply too dangerous to work any other way. Army Chinooks mobilised this afternoon offer the only last-minute chance to save acres of housing and farmland. In Selby and Barlby, 1,000 homes now stand empty behind flood banks that are already close to being overwhelmed.
It's still an extremely serious situation, and there are many concerns that the water is going to keep on coming and possibly overtop some of these flood defences.
100,000 sandbags have now been filled and positioned across North Yorkshire. In York, the army squeezed its heavy trucks down narrow riverside streets to build new ramparts in the ancient city. So far, the defenders appear to have held the river at bay. Despite urgent efforts by the army and the emergency services, it is still touch and go whether the strengthened defences here can hold back the flood. The Environment Agency say a peak in the river is still some 6 hours off, and the situation remains critical. Robert Hall, BBC News, North Yorkshire.
Our correspondent Catherine Marson is in Barlby. Catherine, it's obviously very worrying for people there. What's the latest?
Yes, it is. It's a desperate race against time now to try to shore up the flood defences all along the river.
All afternoon, Chinook helicopters have been arriving, bringing in more sandbags. The Army have been using those to try to reinforce those defences. But this is an area that's already flooded. It's already underwater, as you can see. This is from the last flood at the weekend. People here still have no electricity, no way of cooking, no way of knowing what's going on. It's another very miserable night ahead in Barby.
Catherine,
Fiona.
thanks very much for joining us. There are currently 43 severe flood warnings in place around England and Wales. In some parts of Wales, the water levels are falling for the moment, but in large parts of the Midlands, North East and Kent, flooding is still widespread, and 3 more days of rain are forecast.
For the third time in as many weeks, the weary though stoical residents of Yalding in Kent are once again flooded. This area has had its worst weather for nearly 200 years. The Environment Agency warns it could be the start of a long, wet winter of floods.
Normally the ground saturates gradually through the winter, so about January, February time, there's nowhere else for the water to go. We've got to that stage early in November, so any more rain, unless we have a very prolonged dry period, is going to begin to run off the land, and frankly there's nowhere else for it to go.
As residents in Bangor-on-Dee in Wales are told to evacuate, the Environment Agency says more should be spent on flood defences after cutbacks by successive governments. More than 30 rivers are at risk in the next 2 days in Scotland, North Wales and in England in the North East, the Midlands and the South East. The floods have closed some major roads in West and East Sussex and Derbyshire. Most at risk now, parts of the Thames and Shrewsbury. In most places, water levels are stabilising, but that could change as rain from the past few days moves downstream. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News.
And the time is 17 minutes past 6. In a few moments, police warn of the possibility of a terrorist bombing campaign over Christmas. After a long battle, compensation for the survivors of Japanese prisoner war camps.
And in 15 minutes, all Scotland's top stories, sport, a full weather forecast, and back to school for the Education Minister as the government pledges to raise standards in the classroom. And making his mark in films, how this Highland scriptwriter has reached Hollywood without having to leave his room.
Scotland Yard are warning the public of the possibility of a mainland terrorist bombing campaign over Christmas by Irish Republican dissidents. It came as detectives gave details of a man they're hunting in connection with a rocket attack on the MI6 building in London 2 months ago.
The new poster campaign follows more than 100 telephone calls this year alone warning of bombs on the mainland. The police have no doubt that groups such as the Real IRA are planning another attack.
The most worrying form of attack, and it brings back the spectre of Omagh, is a large vehicle bomb in a city centre.
The rocketing of MI6 is thought to have been carried out by a man who escaped on a motorcycle. The police say he's in his 20s, slim, with dark hair.
The number of dissident Republican terrorists on the mainland is in the tens rather than the hundreds, but they have access to explosives and weapons, and fears of another attack before Christmas are very high. John Silverman, BBC News at Scotland Yard.
The pressure is increasing on the government to announce big handouts in tomorrow's mini-budget. Today it was the turn of the pensioners to once again voice their demand for an increase in the basic state pension. With the 60-day deadline set by the fuel protesters also looming, the Conservative leader William Hague said that there was now a very real sense of crisis.
Pensioners are in line for a big rise tomorrow, and some protesters were invited inside number 10 State Dining Room for a cuppa with Tony Blair, who moved rapidly on when the finger-waving demands got too heated. The Prime Minister's spokesman pointedly said they were listening to the pensioners, proving there are other ways of making your case than threatening to paralyse the roads. Obviously taking no chances, some of them decided to paralyse the roads around Parliament anyway, sitting tight in their wheelchairs. They're asking for pensions to be put up in line with wages. It's almost certain they won't get that, and the Prime Minister's father-in-law, actor Tony Booth, didn't save his message for a quiet family chat.
We are not going to go quietly away, satisfied with token gestures. We are going to fight and fight again until the link between pensions and earnings has been re-established.
And in another London hall, William Hague told an audience of Conservative women that there's a sense of crisis in the country which the Prime Minister's ignoring.
Hard-working people have been taxed and taxed with nothing to show in return, and they're in revolt, and a public that expects their government to be in control knows that this Prime Minister and this government have lost control.
It's no exaggeration to say the Chancellor will tomorrow hold the fate of the government in his hands. He'll want to do something to put a smile back on the faces of these people, but also please the motorists and big business. The Tories' case is simply that the government has now lost it. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Westminster.
One person has died and 15 other people injured after a crash on the M40 in Oxfordshire. A coach, a lorry and a recovery vehicle collided on the hard shoulder of the northbound carriageway near Stokenchurch in Buckinghamshire. There's been a further slump in sales at Marks & Spencer. The high street chain has reported a drop in its half-yearly profits, with demand for clothes falling sharply. The chairman of M&S has warned that there are no quick fixes to the company's problems. After a long battle for compensation, British servicemen and women who were held in Japanese prisoner of war camps during the Second World War are each to receive a payment from the government of £10,000. And the widows of those who since died will receive the same sum.
On a visit to an army museum, the Prime Minister was greeted warmly by survivors of the Japanese prison camps who've long campaigned for compensation. He said he believed the award of £10,000 to each of the veterans and their widows put right a long-standing injustice.
Thank you for your courage and thank you for what you did, because I know I am standing here in a free country and my children are growing up in a free country because of what you did for us.
1 in 4 of those captured by the Japanese died in the brutal conditions. The survivors are scarred by terrible memories of torture and deprivation. They say the compensation is only partial justice.
I'm very pleased indeed with what we've got today. But the other side of the coin is there's still the outstanding apology that I want from the government of Japan.
The compensation scheme, including civilian prisoners and the widows of those who died, meets all the key demands of the survivors of the Japanese camps. The government says it recognises a unique debt of honour for the suffering they endured. Carol Walker, BBC News at the National Army Museum in London.
It's election day in America. The voting is still going on. Let's rejoin Hugh in Washington. Hugh.
Fiona, thanks again. As well as electing their 43rd president today, Americans are also deciding the shape of both houses of Congress. That's to say the Senate and the House of Representatives. And by far the most intriguing race for the Senate is the one in New York, where Hillary Clinton is in a fierce battle with the Republican Rick Lazio. From New York, here's Gavin Hewitt.
Hillary Clinton was one of the first to vote, arriving early at a school close to her New York home with her daughter Chelsea and with the president. If she wins, she'll make history as the first wife of a president to be elected senator. The final polls give her the edge over her opponent, but the outcome could be close. For the first time, President Clinton waited to vote for his wife.
You can't put me down as undecided.
This vote is not just about Hillary Clinton winning a seat in the Senate. It's a mini referendum on the Clinton years. And for this couple who've devoted a lifetime to politics, today something of their legacy is at stake. Hillary Clinton began her campaign in the aftermath of the scandal that nearly destroyed her husband's presidency. But during the election, she's relied heavily on him, calling him each day. At every stop, she's praised the man who betrayed her. And today she expects the next chapter in the Clinton story to belong to her.
How do you feel, Mrs. Clinton?
Very excited today. I'm very, very excited.
Are you going to win?
Recently, the president said he hated the fact that he wasn't running for anything. But when I spoke to him today, he said he was at peace.
How does this day feel for you, sir, not campaigning?
Well, I am campaigning. I'm just campaigning for my wife. And it's been wonderful. It was exhilarating.
In a few hours, the people of New York will deliver their verdict on the Clintons. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Chappaqua.
Now, there is one important thing to note. As the presidential results come in later tonight, the winner is not necessarily the man who's won the biggest number of votes nationwide. And this is why. The system is all based on an electoral college. 538 votes in total, shared between the 50 votes of the United States of America. Each state, depending on its size, has a share of that college, and the candidate who wins the state election then picks up the electoral college block. And the first of 270 becomes president. Now, with me is our correspondent, Stephen Sacker. That means, Stephen, that the guy who gets the biggest number of votes isn't necessarily the winner. It's a pretty odd system.
It's odd, Hugh, and it happened twice in the 19th century. We had two presidents who lost the popular vote, and it could happen this year, and here's why. Because George Bush, we know, is going to stack up big, big wins in his home state of Texas and across the south of the United States. And if Al Gore does well in these battleground states that we talk about so much, if he squeaks victories in those states, he could actually win the Electoral College, but he might be 2 or 3 percentage points back in the popular vote. Now, the Republicans would cry foul, but the fact is, rules are rules, and it would be a Gore win.
Now, we've had 6 or 7 hours of voting, depending on where you are. Any signals at all?
The signals so far are mostly about turnout. I was in Pennsylvania at dawn this morning to see the polls open. I can tell you there, they said they'd had double the number of voters in the first couple of hours that they saw in 1996. Anecdotally, across the country, the turnout is high. That could be good news for Al Gore, because it may mean that he's getting black voters to the poll, he's getting union members to the poll, the core Democratic constituency. So it may be that a high turnout might be good news for Al Gore, but it's going to be very, very close.
It's exciting. Stephen, thanks very much indeed. Right, now as the BBC will of course bring you live coverage of the results as they come in, so here's David Dimbleby with some details.
From late tonight through till tomorrow morning, I'll be here in Washington as the results of the closest presidential race in recent history start to come through. Months of campaigning, thousands of speeches, millions of words from 2 candidates, and one winner, elected to the most important and powerful office on earth. Join me for what's likely to be an exciting night at 11:25 here on BBC One.
So by this time tomorrow, we should know whether it'll be President Gore or President Bush moving into the White House in January 2001. We'll have a full report, of course, tomorrow on all the results. Let's go back to you, Fiona.
Thanks, Hugh. Let's take a look at the weather now. Sarah Wilmshurst is here. Sarah, what have you got for us?
Fiona, I wish I had better news actually, because there is more rain to come, particularly in the next 24 hours. Some heavy rain in eastern Scotland, northeast England, and indeed some parts of the Midlands. Tomorrow we'll have further showers or longer spells of rain. It may dry out a little bit later on Thursday, a slightly drier spell of weather for a time. That's not going to last though. More on that in the next half an hour. So we have plenty of showers around at the moment. Those showers are really going to gather together through tonight across these eastern areas. Some really nasty driving conditions. We will keep you updated within the next half an hour. Fiona.
Thanks, Sarah. That's the news so far this Tuesday evening. We'll be back with an update on the latest news just before 7. Before that, it's time to join the BBC's news teams throughout the United Kingdom.